The idea behind the BRRRR strategy is to buy a property under market value and or to improve the value of the property through renovations such as adding a legal basement apartment. The next step is to then get the property reappraised at its new higher value and then put a new mortgage on the property and refinance all of the renovation costs out of the property, as well as hopefully your down payment. Sounds great, right? Now, if you're new to my channel, my name is Koukun, and in this channel, we talk about real estate investing, career building, as well as money management. If those are of interest to you, consider subscribing. So for those of you who are not familiar with the BRRRR strategy, it is an acronym for buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat. Basically, it's a strategy that allows you to scale a real estate portfolio very quickly because you are left in each property after going through this full cycle without any of your own money left in that property. So let's look at a case study here of a property that one of my clients, Ryan and Rodney, purchased in the city of Welland. So this was a property bought in Welland back in December of 2018. The upstairs was in decent shape, not newly renovated by any means, but it was passable. And the basement had a flood prior to them buying the property, and the previous owner gutted the basement, so it was a blank slate. But they actually went ahead and waterproofed the exterior of the basement. So it was a basement that was ready to finish, but it was completely empty. This allowed them to get a really good purchase price because a gutted, empty, unfinished basement, especially this was really unfinished. They broke even, I believe, the concrete in some areas. So it allowed them to get a good purchase price. And for what they were looking to do, the plan was at some point to add a legal basement apartment. It actually fit perfectly. A blank slate is much easier to work with than if you had to take out any of the existing renovations or existing finishes in a property. Their original plan was to just purchase the home and rent it out as a single family home. So they bought it in the end of 2018. And then by mid 2019, I was discussing with them, there are some sales of legal duplexes in Welland at some high prices. So at this point, it may be worth it to put the money to renovate the property and add that legal basement apartment. So that's when they got started down that road, arranged their finances, and by earlier this year in 2020, they were able to complete the legal basement apartment renovation. So they've owned the property now only for a year and 2-3 months. So let's get into some of the numbers of this project. They purchased this property for $237,400. Their total investment, $123,000 and change. Their 20% down payment, $47,000, closing costs about $4,600, and renovations of about $71,000. Their project, once the renovations were done and they got it reappraised, actually came back at $440,000. This is for a legal duplex, and they are actually left with a negative balance in terms of funds left in the deal. That means they got paid close to $17,000 in surplus after receiving their down payment, closing costs, and renovation money out of this project. The kicker is this is only with a 75% loan to value mortgage. Typically we get 80%. In this case, one of their jobs was actually affected due to COVID. So it affected their ratio such that they weren't able to qualify for a traditional A lender. So they had to go to the B lending route, which is a little bit less strict, but they charge higher interest rates. In this case, it's about 3.75, and it's only a 25-year amortization. So their monthly payments are going to be a bit higher. So anyways, they were able to get that $330,000 mortgage. It paid off the initial $190,000 or so mortgage, and they were able to cash out $140,000. So that's their initial down payment renovations plus that surplus. So let's look into what it looks like on a monthly basis. So this property is actually rented for $2,800 a month. The upper unit is rented for $1,500 plus hydro, and the basement is rented for $1,300 plus hydro. Their monthly expenses are about $2,480. So their mortgage is $1,690, property tax about $200, insurance $125, water $125, gas $150, and they are actually paying for a property manager for about $190 a month. They are left with about a $300 cash flow with all of their money out of the deal. Plus, that cash flow number may increase a little bit once they get an A mortgage with a lower interest rate. Before we go into some more details about the BRRRR strategy, I want to share a few quick words that my buddy Daniel from Butler Mortgage has to share about the BRRRR strategy and the financing when it comes to doing these kind of projects. So check it out.
Hey everyone, Dan Patton from Butler Mortgage with a few extra questions I get when it revolves around BRRRR strategies and refinancing and restructuring. Number one, how long does it take before you can refinance? Well, it really depends on the purchase price of the home, the equity that's remaining in a home, but on a qualified application, we can usually get up to 80% of the value of a home. So on a qualified application, if you buy it for say $500,000, do a bunch of renos, and a year later it's worth $100,000 more, typically we can get about $80,000 from that property. Number two, which banks are the most lenient when working with investors? To be honest, it really depends on the type of deal you're trying to do. All lenders are really good. They all have different products for investors. Certainly they all have their own nuances with how they qualify a rental property, but they all have great product and favorable. It really depends on the kind of deal you're doing. Number three, what's the most amount someone can refinance? Up to 80%. We answered that in the first point. Typically 80%. Sometimes banks will scale you back to a 75 or 70%, depending on the type of deal or the type of lender. But most banks on a residential home will go up to 80% loan to value on a refinance. Number four, is the appraiser hired by the bank or the owner of the property? Believe it or not, nowadays they use a third-party system that will order the appraisal direct to the appraiser. So there's no actual contact from the client or the mortgage professional or even the bank rep at that point. It's an automated system where they select the appraiser who comes out to the property.
So let's talk a little bit more about the BRRRR strategy as well as the pros and cons. In order for you to be able to pull off a BRRRR, you need to buy a property and renovate a property for less than 80% of its repaired value, so its after repair value, in order for you to pull out your renovations as well as your original down payment. This is quite tough to do because you're almost talking about numbers equivalent to that of a flip property, basically a property that you could renovate and then sell for a profit. Now, the pros are pretty obvious, right? As long as you can keep qualifying for mortgages, if you can successfully do this on every single property you buy, you can essentially buy as many properties as you can get qualified for in terms of mortgages, because you're left with almost nothing in each deal after renovations. The cons are a little subtle and they're not discussed as often. What I find is that many investors start losing track of the fundamentals of real estate investing when they go deep into this idea of a BRRRR. And when I say the fundamentals of real estate investing, I'm talking about buying properties in good neighborhoods that attract a good tenant profile and properties that produce positive cash flow after all your expenses. And with a BRRRR, especially, cash flowing after your new increased mortgage. I've seen investors either go into some of the roughest parts of some cities that we focus on when it comes to investing, properties that I would never want to own long-term, where the tenant profile you attract is likely not going to be the ones that take care of the property and allow you to have a property without a significant maintenance expense over time, or properties that are actually so high in price that its rent can no longer cover its monthly expenses. So even though they've created that margin and they've improved the value, it's now a negative cash flowing property, which you can do one or two of those, but if you start doing many of those, banks are not going to lend to you anymore. And from an investment point of view, I do not like to own negative cash flowing properties. So what I personally recommend is what I call a slow BRRRR. Essentially, focus on the fundamentals of real estate investing. Own good quality properties in great areas that attract a really good tenant profile. Find strategies that allow you to have positive cash flow and allow the BRRRR to happen over time. When you own an investment property and you're not so fixed on getting your money out of the deal within a year, within 6 months, you're able to be patient with that property and give it 1, 2, 3. My first property, I waited 4 years before I refinanced, took the money and bought another property. If you can give it that time and have that patience, that really sets you up for building a quality portfolio and allow you to buy multiple properties over time and allow each of those properties to really mature and create cash flow and create equity for you. A story that comes to my mind. So one of my investment mentors, he was someone that I met pretty early on in my investing, who actually did really well for himself through real estate investing. And when I met him, he was in his 70s and he had done a lot of different styles of properties. One of the properties that he discussed with us, he owned a 100-unit apartment building near Ryerson University in Toronto. So this is like Toronto core, downtown Toronto core, and it was a 100-unit apartment building. So he shares this story with us. He purchased that property with 2 other partners. So it was 3 of them. They each put up $100,000 and they bought this property for $1 million. Now it was a property filled with drug dealers and the worst tenant profile imaginable at that time. And what he and his partners ended up doing is, renovate the units, get the bad tenant profile out, put in students and retirees and the tenant profile they wanted to attract. And over the next 6 years, they actually fully or mostly fully turned over that building. Then his 2 investment partners did not want to continue to upgrade the property and they actually wanted to exit. They wanted their money back. So what he ended up doing 6 years after they've purchased the property is he told them, okay, I'll buy out your ownership in the property. He went to the bank, he got a loan on this building for $2 million and he paid his 2 partners $1 million each to buy their portion of the building. So it wasn't a bad investment at all for them, right? They put $100,000, they're getting $1 million within 6 years. That was probably one of the best investments they've made. But what's interesting is his perspective, because he was a long-term real estate investor. He wasn't in it for the short term. He wasn't looking to sell the building. He wasn't looking to flip or do any short-term type of investments. He wanted to keep this for the long run. He ended up owning that property for the following 20 or so years. And when I met him, that particular property was worth close to $20 million. He had less than $1 million of mortgage left on the property, and that property was cash flowing close to $1,000 a day, more than $360,000 a year in cash flow. So if you consider his initial investment of $100,000 multiplied by 200 times and is now paying him a cash flow 3 times his initial investment, those are returns that are incredible, but it took him 25 years to pull that off. So when I look at that example, that's what sticks in my mind when it comes to long-term real estate investing. In the short term, there are all these strategies to try to make your returns a little bit faster, to try to buy a little bit more in terms of investment properties. But keep in mind, real estate is a long-term investment strategy. And if you stick with it, especially over periods of 10 years plus, that's how you can really see the benefits. I'm still on year 7 right now, and I'm excited to see what I can accomplish by the end of 10 years and then actually beyond that, because I think after my first 10 years, I'm actually going to be able to accomplish much more than I can even imagine right now. So keep that in mind. The BRRRR strategy is an amazing strategy. I always recommend look for good deals. Look for deals where you can try to pull out your down payment. Look for deals where you can create cash flow. There's nothing wrong with that. But focus on the fundamentals of real estate investing and allow these property to create equity over time so that you're building your portfolio on a solid base and you can keep these properties. And these should be quality properties that you don't want to just sell after 1 or 2 years because you can't deal with the tenants who, don't pay the rent on time or damage the property or, just give you a hard time. You want quality properties, quality tenants, and good cash flow. Hope you found that helpful. If you're interested in real estate investing, specifically in the Niagara region, I've created a guide where you can get it in the link below. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I'd be happy to answer. Until next time, all the best.